Voters in the rural Alberta riding of Battle River-Crowfoot head to the polls today. The by-election will decide the fate of Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre as he bids to regain a seat in the House of Commons. Poilievre lost his long-held riding outside of Ottawa in the federal election, and he's spent the summer taking stock and getting to know the most Conservative riding in the country. The CBC's Erin Collins joins us from Drumheller, Alberta. Hello, Erin.
Hey, Karina.
This is a first-of-its-kind election in a few ways. What do we know about how the day has gone so far?
It really is. Many firsts, and it's fascinating, of course. Here in this part of the world, not very often, of course, you get the opportunity to elect your member of parliament who happens to be the leader of a major federal party. So that's on the books today. Obviously, as you mentioned, Pierre Poilievre trying to make his way back to Ottawa as the member of parliament for this riding. But on top of that, there's a couple other big firsts that are happening here that are just really intriguing to watch. We have this over 200 people on the ballot today. So this is part of that longest ballot committee. It's sort of a protest movement that's trying to stack potential candidates on the ballot as a protest to the first past the post system. And it's really forced Elections Canada to do a few unique things. First of all, they're going to be having blank ballots, which is you're going to have to write in the candidate's name. There's going to be a big laminated book. You're going to have to go through all these candidates and write in your name. It's a very unique thing that's happening here. And I can tell you, Karina, in this part of the world where conservative politics sort of rules the day, it's not a popular move.
People need to be accountable for trying to destroy the voting system that I've been a part of for well over 40 years.
People who are voting should know who they're voting for, so they should have an idea of that name when they go in there. So I think maybe it's causing people to be sure of who they're voting for.
I knew whom I was voting for, so it was very easy for me.
Some good news, Karina, spelling's not going to count, right? So if you get the name of your chosen candidate wrong, it's not going to spoil the ballot. That's good news. And another interesting and unique aspect of this by-election is the turnout. More than 14,000 people already voting in advance polls, and that's up from the spring election.
So we hear, of course, a lot about the stakes of this by-election, and people have talked about how high they are. Just how much is at stake for the Conservative leader?
Well, it's everything, right? Obviously, trying to get his job back and get back to Ottawa to start being the leader of the opposition again. And I want to tell you a little bit about where he's chosen to run, because I think that says a little bit about the stakes as well. You mentioned that this is one of the most, if not the most conservative ridings in the country. I'll tell you a quick little anecdote. I covered a provincial election a while ago and went to a candidates forum nearby here. There were 4 people taking part. 3 of them were different flavors of conservative, and the 4th was a separatist. No one else showed up. So that's the kind of riding that Pierre Poilievre has chosen to run in, which, you know, some people have criticized because it's not sort of stretching, you know, his comfort zone by running maybe in, you know, Toronto or something like that. So there are folks that say that, you know, his predecessor got more than 80% of the vote here. If he doesn't, you know, come in and around there, that's going to say a lot. So political watchers really watching how he does. Have a listen to some of that.
Oh, there's very little doubt that he's going to win. It's really hard to imagine a scenario where he loses. That's really not on anybody's agenda right now. What we're really thinking about is how big his margin of victory is going to be. He can win, but if he doesn't win with a big majority, that will be problematic for him.
So problematic, and it won't be too long before he, you know, has to sort of face the music. If it doesn't turn out that way, there's going to be a leadership review in January in Calgary. And as far as just finding out, you know, how things pan out today, that won't be fast either. Elections Canada says because of all those people on the ballots, they're going to start counting ballots a couple hours early. That's another first. And it could take them a little bit longer to get the results out today. So Mr. Poilievre and the rest of the country could be waiting a little longer than usual to see how things turn out.
Thank you, Erin. CBC's Erin Collins in Drumheller, Alberta. Time to bring in the Power Panel. Lisa Raitt is a former Conservative cabinet minister. Vandana Cotter was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and Rob Russo is Canada correspondent for The Economist. Welcome all. Rob, I'll start with you.
Hello, Karina.
Hi. You were writing on this weekend. Are you expecting any surprises tonight?
No, I'd be surprised if there were any surprises. I think if you go back the last 7 or 8 elections, the lowest amount of support for the Conservatives in this riding, even when it was divided, but in this sort of general area, was 71% when Erin O'Toole was the leader. This is rock-ribbed Conservative territory. Nobody expects this to be a serious test of the Conservative brand. I think the real test for Mr. Poilievre will come in the fall, and to a lesser extent in January. But in the fall, I think people, when I spoke to Conservatives for the piece you were referring to, Karina, Conservatives were saying, can he become more statesman-like? Is he the kind of person who can grow that way? Because when you look at the Liberal platform, much of it was pinched from the Conservatives. So there doesn't seem to be a lot of problems with the platform that the Conservatives are proposing, but the person who is proposing it. So can Mr. Poilievre change? Can he become more appealing to Canadian voters? That's what we're going to see, I suppose, over the fall.
And Lisa, there's lots of talk about how the probability is that he's going to win, obviously. That's what we're all hearing. But there is also this talk about how much he needs to win by. So what do you make of the threshold of votes that he needs to maintain his reputation and to have, like, how big a victory does he need?
I don't really think that people are going to look at the number here. I think some pundits will on the outside and wonder. Where it's really going to matter is what happens in the leadership review that happens in January. Now, whether or not he gets some momentum or he has naysayers, pointing out that he may not have got as high a number as Dane did. But the reality is that what matters is the leader wins, the leader goes back into the House of Commons and is able to then continue from there. And of course, as I said, the next step in all of this is the leadership review that happens in January.
Okay, so, obviously looking forward to January, it's a little while from now. Vandana, a recent survey by Nanos put Liberal support at 45% against 32% for the Conservatives. How much do you think that is really just the result of Poilievre being less in the spotlight this summer? So in terms of looking towards the fall, perhaps those numbers will improve for the Conservatives.
Well, I think whether he wins or whatever, what number he has tomorrow, he has lost quite an amount. And what I mean by that is that summer tours for politicians is enormous. It is something that we put a lot of efforts into on the narrative, meeting Canadians, that's so important. And he's lost that runway. So he's quite behind the Prime Minister, who's been able to come out, talk about the issues Canadians talk about the things Canadians elected him to talk about, and share the narrative that he is the right guy in charge. So I think he'll have to play catch up. I think to Rob's point, September is going to be key for Mr. Poilievre. If he can, despite what happens tonight, I think if he can showcase himself well in September, that'll go well. But if it doesn't, to Lisa's point, it might not be that great for him for the leadership review.
Rob, do you think this could all change the numbers? If Poilievre comes back to the House of Commons, that is where he has often performed the best, and then certainly known to be a strong performer in the House.
Well, it depends on how he performs. I think when you look at those Nanos numbers and look at the preferred Prime Minister numbers, they're rather wretched for Mr. Poilievre. I think he trails Prime Minister Carney by about 20 points on preferred Prime Minister. So that tells you something about tone. And again, not policy, but tone. I think we have begun to see, and if you ask his supporters in caucus, some moderation in that tone. Over the summer, we heard Mr. Poilievre say that they are prepared to support the government in defending Canada against Mr. Trump. But I think there are Conservatives, many who were on the record and off the record in the piece that I wrote, who want him to go further. Sean Spear, for instance, wrote an interesting piece in the Hub and said the same thing to me, that he would like to see Mr. Poilievre propose some new ideas. And I think that he suggested 2 or 3 of them as well. Sure, the Liberals might steal them, the Liberals might shoot them down, but you look less like someone who has that unerring instinct and instant reflex for the jugular. If you're doing that, you look more like a prime minister in waiting, which is, I think, what most Conservatives would like to see Mr. Poilievre become.
Lisa, you talked about the leadership review. So how would you gauge Conservative, like in the party, support for the leader right now? Has anything changed since the election?
No, it's rock solid. That is for sure. And I just want to pick up on something Rob mentioned, which is what the fall will bring. What the fall will also bring is perhaps a little less popularity for Mr. Carney. He is embroiled right now, his government is, with respect to a pretty contentious labor dispute with the flight attendants at Air Canada. That's not going to reflect well on the government. He also has a situation where today he's missing in action in Washington, wasn't invited to the table to be part of what's happening with respect to Ukraine, despite how much Canada has done already on this file. Those two things will be brought up over and over again by the Conservatives when they do return in the fall. So opposition has to oppose, and they have to point these things out. So maybe the moderation of a tone in some ways, but certainly those two areas are going to be very much areas in which the Conservatives can point out the fact that this may be the same government that you've already had in the past, and Mr. Carney may have cleaned up the image for a period of time, but the problems are still there with the party and with this government, and they'll light up the fall as much as they possibly can that way.
Prime Minister Mark Carney and Ontario Premier Doug Ford say they're united amid U.S. trade talks and focused on keeping the Canadian economy competitive.
We've got a lot of work to do on major projects, on affordability, on security in our communities, and I think we're working well together.
We're united on the message of let's start worrying about how we can be competitive here. Donald Trump is so unpredictable. I don't even know if he knows what he's doing tomorrow morning.
The leaders held a closed-door meeting today as U.S. tariffs remain in place, raising questions about whether Canada can get back to a tariff-free reality. The Power Panel is back. Lisa Raitt, Vandana Cotter, and Rob Rousseau. Vandana, Premier Ford said the main deal that matters is CUSMA. Do you take that to mean that the focus is not on a trade deal, but looking to those renegotiations?
I think it's the focus on the fact that CUSMA does help Canada quite a bit. And all of these trade negotiations could be a way to try to renegotiate CUSMA as well, maybe part of his parlay into it. So the most important thing is most things are protected by CUSMA. So that is something to protect. And I think also on top of that, he said it himself, that it's hard to predict. Mr. Trump, it's hard to predict where he's thinking, what he's going to do the next day. So why not focus on the things that we can have a bit more control over? So I think that is the priority and exactly what I think Canadians want to. They want to focus on the big picture items of where we can make sure that we're focusing on the Canadian economy and protecting Canadians' jobs and their livelihoods.
Lisa, I want to get your take because a lot has been said about how Canada's fairly fortunate that a lot of the tariffs we're facing, as long as products are and goods are CUSMA compliant, that they're exempt, and that has made the overall tariff impact lower than otherwise would be. So CUSMA is kind of important, and yet you start to get a sense or maybe a concern that if that's on the table and if that's in jeopardy, then Canada is in real trouble. What's your take on that?
So my take is this, is that the actual free trade agreement between Canada and the United States is up for discussion this summer to see whether or not it's something that Canada and the United States and Mexico want to continue on. If they choose that they don't want to continue on, there's actually a long period of time for this agreement to continue on. It's like 2036. So it's not like it's immediate. So there is a protection for Canada for all those goods that are under CUSMA. That could help us in the auto sector. That could help us in other sectors. The problem is, though, we have these extraordinary tariffs on things that also matter in our economy, on steel, on aluminum. And those things have to be dealt with as well. Softwood lumber would be another example. And they have to be negotiated out as well. So yes, we have a free trade agreement. Yes, there's going to be discussions around it, as there always was going to be. But it's not something that I think is existential for us at the moment. But those other tariffs are. And if we want to keep our economy rolling in the right direction and having investor confidence, those are the things that we really need to focus on as well.
Rob, Ford is saying that the PM is doing a really good job considering the circumstances he's in. What do you make of this latest show of unity between the two leaders? I mean, some people have tossed around the word bromance, but it is quite remarkable that he is clearly on side with the Prime Minister.
Yeah, I'm surprised that he didn't jump into Mr. Carney's lap and nuzzle him in the ear. And that could come. Listen, there is another lesson there, I think, for Mr. Poilievre. My understanding is that those two men have still not had a substantive meeting, nor has Mr. Poilievre had a substantive meeting with Tim Houston. I understand that there are a lot of Conservatives that are pretty confident that Mr. Carney is going to run into difficulties. And that's true. I don't know of very many prime ministers who, after winning a first term, actually increase their vote count or plurality or their support when they present themselves for a second term. But that ignores several realities for the Conservatives. The reality is that Mr. Trump is not going away, and he was the X factor that delivered support to the Liberals. The other factor that doesn't seem to be changing for now is that the collapsed NDP vote shows no signs of resuscitating. Perhaps with Labour strife, it might, but there is absolutely no indication of renewed support for the new Democratic Party, which Conservatives need. I think the other thing that's interesting out of the meeting today, and I haven't had a readout from it yet, I'm interested in that, is we have built our economy in Canada, in essence, to go north-south. Railways, ports, that sort of thing. I want to know whether they have begun discussions to actually diversify our economy in an infrastructure way so that we begin to talk about ports, roads, other infrastructure that can get our natural resources to both coasts, to Europe and to Asia. I'm looking for something like that out of this meeting as well.
Okay, I want to move on to the other big topic of the day. That would be Air Canada. Following a weekend strike action, hundreds of thousands of Canadians remain in travel limbo as Air Canada flight attendants are defying a back-to-work order. Prime Minister Mark Carney is urging both parties to resolve the dispute as quickly as possible.
We recognize very much the critical role that flight attendants play in keeping Canadians and their families safe. It's important that they're compensated equitably at all times, fairly at all times. That's the reason why there have been negotiations over the course of the last 8 months. It is disappointing that those negotiations did not come to an agreement, and it was the judgment of both the union and the company that they were at an impasse. That's not my judgment, it's their judgment.
So, Lisa, as former Labour Minister, I might add, in a government that was also criticized for use of back-to-work legislation, but I want to know what you make of the government's response on this. Is there more they should be doing? Have they gone in the right direction, or are they misstepping?
What a mess. First of all, you have to think about everybody who is stranded around the world and everybody who's worried about whether or not they're going to have their plans fulfilled. And what a mess in terms of how do we move forward from this and how do we get some clarity and some finality. So for that, I'm going to say that the government, I'm going to criticize them on because they should have thought this through a little bit more. The only true way in order to stop a strike or a lockout and ensure that people go back to work is by passing an act of parliament. That's the only sure way of doing it. That's the back to work legislation, which has to go through both the House of Commons and the Senate. The minister has to be accountable. Everybody has to vote, and you have to win the vote in the House for that to happen. Perhaps the government looked at this issue and realized we're not going to win that vote. And because we're a minority government. So we're going to have to find another way in which to get both the company to agree to not lock out anymore and the flight attendants and the union to come back from being on strike. And they fumbled because there's so much uncertainty around using this section of the Canada Labour Code. It has not been defined yet by law. It has not been reviewed by the courts as to whether or not it's appropriate. So you got a test case here that all the unions are coming around and supporting, and the flight attendants have an issue that they have broken through a narrative with Canadians on. And that's the question of whether or not they're being paid for when they're not on a plane.
Vandana, the Conservatives, meanwhile, are using this call out to the Liberals. You've got Labour critic Kyle Seaback posting to social media this statement, really talking about the Conservative proposed back-to-work legislation, pay legislation for unpaid work for flight attendants. There's a similar from the NDP earlier when in the previous parliament. I guess, was this use of Section 107 in the Labour Code a misstep by the government?
Yeah, I think, I thought about this a lot over the weekend, and I was at a family wedding, and a lot of my family were stranded in different parts and either couldn't get back home or they're still stuck here. And I would say that this is one of the toughest things to deal with when you're in government. I always hated to have to intervene in any way. We have to respect the collective bargaining process. And it's also, unions are important political bodies. You lean on them hopefully for support during campaigns. And they have, if you look at the Air Canada ad right now, it is very effective. But at the same time, Canadian consumers will only put up with that for so long. For the amount of Canadians to be stranded, any hits to the economy, that is where the government will be stuck between a rock and a hard place. And, there's only so long that Canadians will sustain that. At some point, they'll be angry, so you get squeezed on both sides. So it's hard either way. And I think the decision to make that decision so quickly is very much a theme of the Carney government, where they're very decisive. So I think they chose to focus on what the impacts could be. They probably were told that they were at an impasse in some sort and felt this is the best tool for them to use. But personally, it's one of the toughest issues to have to deal with in government.
Rob, I'm not going to be very fair to you because we only have a minute left or less. So just a quick, do you see any way for this to be resolved quickly?
I'm not sure, to tell you the truth. I do, as somebody who's sat on the union side and on the management side of discussions like this, I took note of the fact that the Canadian Industrial Relations Board did not go to the courts to order the courts to enforce the ruling and force people to go back to work. That to me suggests that CIRB is trying to build credibility and trust so that both sides can come back to the table. So I look forward to more talks that way. I think that was a wise move. And I hope that there is a negotiated settlement. But other than that, I don't know how long any government could allow this to continue. Lisa was part of a government that ended an Air Canada strike during the March break, I think in 2012. So this can't go on for too much longer. But CIRB has been very, very canny, I think, in its restraint up until today.
Well, thanks for all your smart thoughts on this. And the Power Panel is Lisa Raitt, Vandana Cotter, and Rob Rousseau.